Welcome to this INSEAD Knowledge Interview. Innovating at the Top is our topic of the day, with the publication of a new book called Innovating at the Top, How Global CEOs Drive Innovation for Growth and Profit. We're speaking today with Soumitra Dutta. Welcome. You are the Roland Berger Chaired Professor of Business and Technology at INSEAD. There's about 10 lessons basically that come back in the book in each CEO's mouth, because it's just basically a bunch of CEO interviews, and it's interesting to see how all the CEOs say the same things about innovation. What is lesson number one?
You know, it's very interesting because when we started the project, we didn't have a very clear view in terms of whether there would be similarities in the views of different CEOs. And we deliberately went for a collection of CEOs who came from different industries and different geographies. So, I must admit that we were a little, curious about what the outcome would be. And some of our curiosity really also revolved around the basic question: did the CEOs actually consider innovation as part of their core responsibility? Or was this seen as something that could be, delegated to people in white frocks and corporate R&D labs? And I must say, if I had to identify lesson number one, that is very clearly that CEOs view innovation as part of the core portfolio responsibilities. So they see innovation in the company in a very broad sense, not just in a very narrow technical product sense, and they see their roles as being the champions of innovation in the entire organization very clearly. So that's lesson number one.
What about process? I'm getting confused messages from the book about how important process is. Some people saying innovation is not a process. It has to escape the logic of process. But others saying that, on the contrary, process is a very important part of innovation. Where do you come down on the issue of process? I think one chapter or one person says, use process judiciously. What does that mean?
You know, the word process has been much used and abused in corporations over the last, I would say, 2 decades or more, because the whole theme of process became very popular with the whole emphasis on total quality management. And many organizations started implementing processes for total quality, for ISO certifications, and the word process became associated, I think wrongly in many cases, with bureaucracy, with rules, with formal procedures, and so on. At the same time, I think people also have some misconceptions about innovation. So people sometimes think innovation is this fuzzy, undefined, unstructured activity, and this is something that you basically, do by putting people with, strange, ponytails or different colored, socks in a room, and you suddenly get interesting, strange people together and things happen. So I think what you find coming out from the results from this research really is that innovation is neither one of the two, but you need some elements of both. And at the same time, innovation is something which can be embedded in the culture of the organization. So what this means basically is that every single employee of the organization can be innovative. The question really is the right culture present for this person to be innovative? Is the right kind of support available for this person to be innovative? So today what you find is successful organizations, they are trying to create what can be broadly termed as innovation platforms. So these are not processes in the negative bureaucratic sense of the word process, but much more as supporting environments for enabling virtually everyone in the organization to come up with ideas and run with them. So for example, a very simple element of an innovation platform could be the notion of how do you get resources for your ideas. So you have a wonderful idea, but is there a process for you to apply for resources for your new ideas? That's a very simple, tangible example.
And there has to be a culture which allows people to express zany, wacky ideas for innovation without their superior coming down on them or trying to squash that idea. You talked about getting proper resources or funding. I remember one CEO say it's important to maintain funding for innovation even in economic downturns. That's a very topical issue today.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, today, when the whole world, I would say, is really on the thresholds of looking at either a severe recession or hopefully a less severe one. But people, you find two kinds of organizations. So some organizations are hunkering down, cutting back on costs, cutting back on any kind of innovative, risky ventures, and they're basically going back to their core conservative attitudes. And then you have other organizations who are looking at this slowdown and recessionary environment as an opportunity. And there are organizations that are actually saying that, well, how can we build on our strengths and in fact gain market share in these environments? So I would suggest that the organizations that come out more successful and more stronger when the recession ends in 1, 2, hopefully not more, longer, will be the ones that are taking a bolder approach, an approach that is still supportive of innovation and that still looks at opportunities for growth.
I particularly like one quote, some CEO saying, basically, don't confuse authority and expertise. You have to have informed decision makers. And he goes on, I think it was the CEO of Genentech actually, to say, look, I've seen cases where a drug in the R&D pipeline was basically stopped because the decision makers didn't see a future, but the decision makers weren't qualified to make that decision. They didn't have the basic understanding of the research. So you often get that in companies where people who have the innovation have bosses who may not be able to understand the future prospects for growth of that innovation. How do you deal with that?
It's a very common problem, and I think it's a very important issue and challenge for organizations. How do you get people to visualize and envision the future? And I think, clearly all of us, and, including you and me, we live in specific contexts and we suffer from myopia that comes from the context in which we live and work in. And the best solution to that and the best remedy for that really is when you open up. When you force yourself to open up to new ideas and to new possibilities and new, environments. And there are two ways of doing it in organizations. So one way is to increase the level of diversity you have inside your own organization. So the more diversity you have inside your own organization, the higher the chances that you will be exposed to different points of view and different, ways of looking at the same issue. And the second one, which is happening increasingly, is innovation is becoming much more open. It's less closed as compared to before. So earlier, innovation was seen as very much inside a company, inside a corporate R&D department. And today, innovation is seen as really extending outside the organization, extending beyond the boundaries to other partners, to other customers. So opening up the ecosystem innovation is very important out here for also being able to envision the future.
That surprised me in the book because the idea, of course, that you have to share knowledge within the company, that's pretty commonplace. But some people are going further saying we have to share basic fundamental research, including with competitors. Now, isn't being the open enterprise, doesn't that reach some kind of limit when it comes to competitors? I mean, how much information do you really want to share with competitors when you're looking to innovate?
It varies across sectors, so I don't think there's a general rule that is applicable that say the go share everything with competitors. That I think clearly would not probably be applying in many cases. But in general, what you find is no one company can do it alone. So you have to be able to collaborate and compete with different, with your peers. But a lot of the interesting innovation happens when you work in close partnership with your not necessarily direct competitors, but people and organizations who are your suppliers, who are your customers, and who can perhaps help you in getting products to market faster.
Customers, that's important, but it can't be too important because I saw contradictory messages in the book as well. Innovation should come from the customers, their needs, strict focus on their needs. But on the other hand, another CEO saying we can't be too focused on the short-term needs of the customers because we'll lose sight of the big picture.
Absolutely. So, life is never easy, right? So what you see is that customers themselves, just like, as mentioned about you and me being myopic in our views, they themselves have their own myopias. So if you follow one customer group or one customer segment too closely, then you get affected by the same myopia that they, their own context and their own lives. So the way to address this is to enlarge the pool of customers you work with to go into new markets, emerging markets, and you have different customer needs, different customer buying potential, and different possibilities. And that's, I think, what makes, for example, the emerging markets, especially India and China, very attractive, because you have a whole different set of expectations and possibilities coming from customers who are very different from the ones you might have in the developed markets of the West.
You talked earlier about the need for cultural diversity, for cross-fertilization, antagonism perhaps between ideas. Culture for innovation seems to be important. It comes back again and again in the mouth of the CEOs. But what about some cultural barriers to innovation? Because it seems that innovation to foster needs an acceptance of failure. And certain cultures, I'm thinking here of the French culture, the Japanese culture, have a very strong issue with failure. You're not allowed to fail. So how can you innovate in certain cultures? But on the other hand, I can think of tons of examples where French companies have innovated superbly. How do you see the importance of culture in innovation?
It's a very important issue, and also the word culture is little fuzzy in some sense. So it captures many different things at the same time. It's very difficult to nail it down to one or two specific issues. I think the point you mentioned about people taking risks is very important. So clearly you need an organizational climate, or even broader country economic climate, that supports people taking risks. And I think that's very important for making any kind of changes. If you want to innovate, you will make some changes in what you do or what others do or how the organization behaves. So I think that element of risk-taking is extremely important. And people take risks in different ways. Sometimes they take smaller risks, sometimes they take bigger risks, sometimes they take risks in moving to new markets. And I don't think that people inherently are less innovative as compared to others. If you just took a 4-year child and you compare a 4-year child in Japan and France and the US, they are equally inquisitive, equally experimental, equally innovative. So clearly what you see is people inherently are innovative by nature, but what is true is that in some economic systems, in some climates, some kind of behaviors are less encouraged. And that does impact the level of innovation in the environment, no question about it.
Now, one thing that can be surprising about your book, these are interviews with CEOs of mega corporations. We don't think usually as of large companies as being necessarily fostering innovation. We think of innovation as coming from the smaller, fast-moving companies. And I was actually surprised to read that Infosys, the Indian giant company, only spends about 1% of sales on R&D. That doesn't seem very much, even though their sales figure is quite much bigger than some small Silicon Valley high-tech company. But basically, isn't there a chapter missing in this book about small companies and the fact that they have a bigger climate or a better climate than some of these large companies for driving innovation?
Yeah. No, you're raising a very important point, and clearly, we didn't try to cover innovation in all its sort of different forms and different manifestations in this book. So when we started the book, the question we addressed really was for the large global corporation. And you're right in saying a lot of the innovation happens in smaller companies, Silicon Valley and Israel and elsewhere in the world. But the focus of our research for this book really was on the large global corporations. And we were very sort of curious to understand in large global corporations where the CEO is under so much pressure from the market, from analysts, from different external stakeholder groups, how does the CEO perceive innovation as something that he or she has to deal with directly or can delegate it. So, we did deliberately not look at small innovative companies, and we did deliberately look at the large global organizations.
Soumitra Dutta, thank you very much. You are the Roland Berger Chair Professor of Business and Technology at INSEAD. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.